What if everything you thought and believed about successful buying, selling, and financing your home was wrong? Welcome to HomeWise with Michael Miget. This is where you can count on straightforward, objective advice on the right way to make the most out of every dollar you put into your home. Whether it's buying, selling, or financing, even maintaining and growing its value along the way. Coming to you from the NewsTalkSTL studios at Union Station in St. Louis.
Welcome to HomeWise. I'm Stel Ponticus with the host of HomeWise, Michael Miget. And if this is your first time joining us, welcome aboard. We're glad that you're here. Michael, I'm glad you're here. Good to see you, buddy.
Well, Stel, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad that everyone listening is here with us.
Time to dig into some good information.
Yeah, I think we're getting into some fun stuff. So, you got to remember, I live this day in and day out. Pretty much every day of my life for the last 32 years. It's how long I've been doing this. So you'd think that you get sick of it after a while. Not true. I mean, it's more than a job and it's more than an adventure. There's just lots of variation in that. It's more than just a product, right? So people ask me what I do, and if it's like, well, I really don't want to talk about what I do. So I'll just tell them I'm a mortgage guy, or I'm a mortgage loan officer, or I own a mortgage company or something like that. Usually with the intent that I'm not, and it's not that I don't want to talk to people, but I'm not trying to engage in a conversation. And that's really not what I want to talk about anyway. If I'm going to talk about it, I'd like to talk about it in a forum or a way that, is going to benefit somebody. So this show, it speaks to more than one person, and it's organized information, and ideas and concepts that are wrapped around basically form the essence of how I do what I do. And, but it's, you got to love it. And that is what stimulates this, I guess, kind of deep, ongoing, introspection, digging, researching, finding new ways to look at old ideas, not just for the sake of trying to keep them new and sounding new, but trying to drive additional and greater understanding. So we've been talking about banking, the banking process, and I shared with you a banking model that fits a whole lot of the things that we talk about, the things that surround just not only the mortgage decisions, buying, selling, refinancing, what should I do with my debt, how do I handle my money, but it tends to, permeate through your entire financial picture. The same way that I say decisions that surround your home permeate your entire financial picture, with the home being the epicenter of it, because it's the largest, right? It's the place where most of your money is going to reside. It's the place where most of your monthly payments are going to go toward, not just the mortgage payment, or not just the down payment when you're buying, but towards maintaining the home. You're going to have insurance costs on an ongoing basis. You're going to have taxes on an ongoing basis. You're going to have maintenance costs on an ongoing basis. And when you start to, if you go and you chart all that out, you see a very large, inordinate percentage of your monthly outflow, the amount of money that you make that go towards this one thing. And so with the better decisions that we can make surrounding how we manage and do what we do with our homes, it has a chance to move the needle, right, on our what our total net worth is going to be when we get to, along the way to retirement, when we get to retirement, when it's most important, because then at some point we believe that nest egg, of which the home is a part of, is going to then support you through retirement, and hopefully be something that you can pass on in the form of generational wealth to your family, and have it perpetuate generation after generation after generation. So this idea of banking fits into that, and it's a framework. It's a I think of it as a GPS, sort of, to know where you are and like a user manual for your money
Mm-hmm.
to know, like, a lot of people have questions about what they should do with their money. And, they're all variations of just a handful of questions, but they all get asked in very specific ways and very different ways because everybody's situation is a little bit different, detail wise. But they tend to fall into very similar areas where they're really asking the same things. I find that this model answers a lot of those questions in an accurate way. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that you ask the system or you look to the system for guidance and everybody always gets the same answer if they ask the same question. It's a dynamic system. So two people could ask the same question, get two different answers because their situations are different, right? So it's not just an absolute, if this, then do that. It takes into account everything that's going on. And so we explored that. I initially introduced the concept last episode, and I used the example of the debt consolidation scenario that we've been looking at. And I've beat that thing up every which way, right? So if you can tell, I've done a lot of thinking about that. And, because I want to know, in order for me to present it, to recommend it, to prescribe it, if you will, as a solution or part of a solution for somebody, to elicit a specific outcome for them, a benefit, you need to really understand it inside and out. And so it's not just, it's great, so everybody should do it. And if you meet this criteria, then just everybody should do it like that, because even though multiple people might fit that criteria, they aren't necessarily in the same place in their life, and they don't necessarily have the same needs, and they may not have the same goals, and they certainly may not have the same mental makeup. And mindset plays into a lot of this. The banking model, a big piece of it is mindset and the way that you look at these things. So we looked at it last week in the form of questions about debt consolidation. This week, we're going to look at it to answer what is one of the biggest, most common questions I get when people are looking to get pre-qualified for a home, which is, how much money should I put down on the house? Now, the tagline for the show, right? So if we back up a little bit here, everything you believed about financing a home, or buying or selling or whatever, maintaining a home along the way, what if that was wrong? What if you believe now, what if you believe you should do was not what you should do, or that belief was wrong, right? Would that change the decisions that you make? In other words, if you had better decisions about, or if you had better information along which you were going to make the decisions with, would you make a different decision? And I think the answer to that is most people would, right? I think most people are financially responsible at heart. I think they care at heart. And while they may not just go out and voraciously seek information on every single decision that they're going to make, because, we don't have time for that, right? It's not efficient, especially for a decision you're only going to make a few times in your life. Now, this might warrant that because it's such a big decision, but a lot of times people don't think of it as that big of a decision because they haven't thought through it like this. It's important, but is it how much impact is it really going to have? Because we want to simplify things down. It's how our brains work. So this banking process helps do that. But when we look at that question, how much you put down on a home through that lens, makes it easier, makes it more clear, makes it easier to see what decisions we should make. Okay. So let's start with, what do people think now, right? So if you go survey a group of people that are buying homes and you say, what would you like to put down on a home? Or how much do you think you should put down on a home? Not necessarily even, set aside like what you have the ability to put down, but how much should you put down? They will generally answer something along the lines of, as much as possible, right? As much as I can. right? Now, that's a varying answer for some people. Some people don't have the ability to put down a whole lot, while other people have the ability to pay cash. Pay cash? Do people do that? Like, yeah, they do. In fact, I believe, and I don't quote me on this, but during the pandemic was one of the times when we saw a very high amount of cash buyers in the market. Partially because being a cash buyer makes it easier to win that bidding war for a house. But I think it was somewhere upwards of a quarter to a third of all offers made were cash offers, which
that's a pretty hefty
think
amount.
About it. Yeah. So people selling one house and buying another house, and either, if they're downsizing, then they probably may be able to take just all the equity and pour it into the new house and not have a mortgage. But that stems from like, what's going on? Why do people do that? It's because people hate mortgages. Now, you've heard me say that before, right? People hate mortgages. How do I know this? Well, it's what I do. Part of the reason why, if people ask me what I do and I just say the word mortgage, they'll usually go away, right? It's kind of right up there with insurance agent and IRS agent. Nowadays, who knows? People hate mortgages and everything that, that they represent, So remember, it's your largest payment. That makes it, or can make it, a painful payment to make. And most of the time, the people that are making payments like that, they're mostly interest. Okay. And interest equals wasted money. People don't like to waste money or knowingly waste money, especially when it's something that they don't really like in the first place, right? So mortgage viewed as a necessary evil. I don't like mortgage. We don't, like, if we could get the house without the mortgage, we would do that, i.e. cash buyer, remember? Okay. So people, it feels trapped. It's loss of control. It's those things that people like independence, right? So that is on the emotional side of the coin. Now, on the financial side of the coin, there is an argument that you could make for making larger down payments, or in other words, as much as you possibly can, right? So the larger the down payment, the smaller the loan. So the smaller the loan, the smaller the payment. And the smaller the payment, the less negative emotion that goes along with that, right? Because you equate, lower payment, better deal, right? Same house, lower payment, better deal. And that, that may or may not be true, but that's the loose kind of connections that all this takes place in your brain, right? By the way, less mortgage, right? Bigger down payment, less mortgage. That's good too. But if you can't pay cash, or something along the lines like near cash, people will fight tooth and nail to get to that magic 20% number, right? Now, some people believe that you have to have 20% down. You don't. You could do it with as little as 3% and get a regular, ordinary, average, everyday loan. But some people believe that you have to be at 20, whereas others know you can put down less, but in their mind, that's a horrible, terrible thing to do, because if there's one thing that people hate more than a mortgage, it's PMI, right? So if you put down less than 20%, then you're paying PMI. And really, all PMI does is add to the cost. If you think of it as an add-on to the interest rate, it's not exactly how it happens, but in effect, you could think of it that way. Again, it goes to that. Well, it raises the payment. And so it's more pain, and it's kind of seems like you're going the opposite direction. And so then there's just that social stigma, not a social thing, like people know who has PMI and who doesn't. But they know it in their mind that, wow, I'm not getting as good a deal on this because I'm not putting down enough money. And so I have this PMI and it's raising my cost. And so you could go down the road of thinking like, well, if I could put down more, then I could get the bigger home, because if I was going to if I don't have to incur the PMI, I could afford a larger loan amount because my payment would be lower, but you could bring it up to what it was going to be if you had the PMI. And so, it just generally equates to better rate, lower cost. Okay. So, because some people also believe that if you put down more money, you can get a better rate. And that may or may not be true, especially now with the new loan level pricing adjustment debacle fiasco that we had earlier in the summer. So, which, by the way, that's still getting kind of, it's in effect, but it's still getting hammered out. But there are places in that matrix where the less you put down, the better rate you can get. So that kind of upsets this balance a little bit. But it's still, you still have that emotion sitting there of what people believe. So, and this all just, this flows into an overriding concept that is true of most people, which is they are generally risk averse. Okay. And so they equate having a larger loan with more risk. Larger loan, less equity, more risk. Larger loan, more higher rate, higher payment, more risk. And some of that's true, but not all of it's true. And you can argue it a couple of different ways. But when you look at it through that lens, it's, this all starts to make sense. And so, this is what the financial gurus in the media echo. It's what you'll hear if you ask friends, family, neighbors. It's also what you'll hear if you go talk to people in my industry. Okay. And I won't disagree with all of it, but it's not quite that simple. And when we look at it through the lens of the banking model, that's what you're going to see. But these are strong ingrained beliefs that usually will not be challenged just because they're so ingrained with that. So this is kind of a tall order. So I'm not challenging them in a sense that I think I'm trying to change your mind. What I'm doing is I'm uncovering or rolling back the curtain on something in a way that you may not have thought of it before. And it may contribute to you taking an alternative look at it, right? And so that's what you get with me, right? So we're going to dig into that when we come back. Let's go to break and see where this takes us.
You're listening to HomeWise. I'm Stal Ponticus. That is Michael Miget, the host of the show, and we are glad that you're along. We're going to take a quick break here and come right back to HomeWise. Welcome back to HomeWise. I'm Stal Ponticus with the host of the show, Michael Miget. Michael, let's get back into the discussion.
Thanks, Stal. All right. So if you are just joining us, welcome to HomeWise Radio. You can catch up on what you missed at HomeWiseRadio.com. This and all the previous episodes are on there. You can listen to them in any order you want. You can speed them up. You can slow them down. You can pause them. You can start over. You can skip around. You can do all kinds of stuff. There's the previous shows there, and there's a whole lot more. So when you get a chance, drop by, check it out, sign up, and
take advantage of it.
Exactly. Absolutely. So we started by talking about the tagline for the show, everything that you thought you believed about, and then fill in the blank with what you thought you believed. It's the mantra for the show. It's kind of it's the way that, I look at what I do, right? The industry that I'm in, but it's really bigger than that. It's bigger than just mortgage and houses and that, even though that's the center of your financial universe. We're really looking at, if we're going to do this right, we need to look at all of your financial universe, personal financial universe, all of your money, right? Because the home touches all of that, but so does every other part of your money, touches everything else too, mainly because of this process that we're now giving a name to, which I'm calling banking, right? So when I say banking, I don't mean the building down the street. I don't mean we're going to buy a bank. We're not going to start a bank, like a bank where, like, with a sign on the wall that says BANK. What I'm talking about is the philosophy or the mindset of the way that a bank operates. There is an element of that in our personal financial picture, right? We use a bank, right? It's where way we take our money in, it's the way we flow it out. And to some degree, we're not going to be able to stop that because we're not going to create our own banking institution. However, we can opt out of some of it, which is the idea of when we borrow money or when we look at how we're going to handle our money, including money we have borrowed from other people, the way that we do that, and then how we manage that within our entire financial picture. That will change if you do it in accordance with a model like this. All right. So banking, just think of it this way: utilizing your own store of capital to collateralize loans that we make to ourselves. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, instead of borrowing the bank's money, we're going to borrow our own money, or we're going to think of it as borrowing our own money. Now, we do this all the time. If you have money in savings and you take it out to buy something with, guess what? You just did a banking act. I know it involved the bank, okay, but step back from that, and the process of what you just did was a movement of money through a financial system out here, in there, trading for something, some commerce took place, and now you have less money than you had before.
Because of that transaction.
Correct. But you have a new thing, right? And so depending on what the thing was that you bought and how much it was and how that works, how that's going to affect your financial picture going forward, what does that look like? All right. So I use the example of taking that and using it to pay off debt. And if we took it out of savings and we spent it, now we don't have our capital anymore. We don't have the debt, so we don't have the negative cash flow associated with that. But we lost that lump sum because we spent it, right? So we know in banking land here, if you've been with us in previous weeks, that goes against the system, and we're going to dig into that a little bit. But in the same vein that we were looking at using savings for credit cards, now we're looking at using savings essentially to make the down payment on a house, right? And so maybe it's in savings, but maybe it's in the form of equity in existing property that you have. In some way, shape, or fashion, it's capital, right? Whether it's money that we can get our hands on, or whether it's something that represents net worth on our balance sheet, it's considered capital. And so that's why I've kind of backed off the word money a little bit and describing it as capital, because that allows to, one, make the distinction between some of those different types of money or capital. And it's also helps get us away from a term that we already have preconceived notions of what it is and what it, what it means. All right. But rule number one with regards to capital is keep it, preserve it, protect it, guard it, don't lose it. In other words, don't spend it. Right. Now, it's, depending on how you define all those words, we can start to mince details. Let's not do that. Let's just understand that when we say spend something, it means like we went to the store and we spent money and now we didn't get anything. What we bought, we consumed, right? Or maybe we bought a depreciating asset with it, like a car, if you hold that car, that loses value. So that store of value, that store of capital shrank when you drove it off the lot. You gave up money to get it, right? And so one of the things, I don't think we're going to get to it in this show, but it is a significant piece of this, is the difference between the value of a lump sum and the value of a series of periodic payments over time, right? That's the difference between spending a lump sum to buy something and getting something back for which you don't get an equivalent ongoing value that's going to grow, versus taking a loan for that same thing and making payments over time, even if you have to pay interest when you didn't have to give up the original capital, right? Now, the underlying foundation to why what I just said is true is going to turn out to be the focus of today. So I'll save that what that actually means until we can get into this example, because it will make more sense. All right. But our original question, which is, how much should we put down? In a banking model, that answer is as little as possible. All right. Why? Because of rule number one. We don't want to spend our capital. We want to hang on to our capital. Okay. So the goal is to keep as much capital as possible. And using that as our guide, we would want to put the minimum down that we would need to put down in order to still facilitate the transaction or get what we want. Okay. So this is diametrically opposed to what we believe, right? Because I just said that people instinctively want to put down as much as possible to get a smaller loan, to get a smaller payment. But if you put down as little as possible, then you're getting a larger loan and probably a larger payment. And like, is the system wrong? Are we wrong? I refer you back to the tagline. Okay. Now you're going to know why it's phrased exactly the way that it's phrased. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't a slip. It was methodical. It was figured out. What if, right? So just what if, right? It's asking a question that we can dive in and dig into. And so now we have, the makings of an interesting exploration here, right? One hand, we feel like we should put down as much as possible, but if we believe in this banking thing, which we know we already do, we just haven't put words to it, we should put down as little as possible, which is right. Are we wrong? Is the system wrong? Whatever. So I will tell you that it's not quite as cut and dried as that. So when we follow this through all the way down the path, taking into consideration everything that's in the system, the answer really actually won't be as simple and cut and dried as just the minimum, right? Because as the inputs change, in this case, as you put more or less down, it affects other factors in the model. And what we're doing is, this is just one facet of it, right? One variable, one input, when what we're really doing is trying to optimize for the overall outcome or output of the system, which is we want to make the best home buying decision. What we really want to do is make the decisions that are going to maximize our personal wealth over time, okay, within the financial ability or constraints that we have on ourselves. Namely, in this case, how much money do we actually have to put down, right? So that's a governing factor on there. Mm-hmm. Something else that plays into this also, and it kind of complicates it, but is that, and you may have picked up on this already, and if you did, you should pat yourself on the back. It was a very astute observation before I bring it to light, which is that down payment that's made on a home is not lost. I said spent money on a down payment. Well, in your definition of spending, you said you spend money, or you part with money or capital. You don't get a corresponding value back. Well, when you make a down payment on a property, you do get value back. It's just not in the form of money. It's tied up in equity in that property. So that introduces another facet of this, which is the idea that home equity is a lazy asset. What is a lazy asset? Well, what does that mean? It just means an asset that isn't working very hard for you. Okay. It fails what I call the highest and best use test of asset utilization. What the heck does all that mean? Well, I'll just bottom line it for you. Home equity has no rate of return. All right. Because home equity is not an asset. Home equity is a calculation. Asset value minus the liability against that asset. Or in other words, how much is your home worth and what do you owe against it? Right? The difference between those two numbers is your home equity. Well, home equity is not an asset, even though we kind of think of it as it is, because we do this quick and dirty napkin math calculation in our head to figure out, if we have a house that's worth 400 and we owe 300 on it, we have 100,000 in home equity. And then we throw that into the net worth bucket. Right. And then we're going to try to figure out how are we going to grow that 100? Well, you don't grow the 100. What you do, what happens is you grow the 400, right? The home, the value of the home, the asset itself, the home, that's what appreciates or depreciates in some cases, but usually appreciates in value. And then over time, as you make the mortgage payments, the mortgage balance goes down. And so both of those contribute to home equity, but they're not, home equity itself is not the asset. So, home equity has no rate of return on it. But when you are looking at, well, how much down payment am I going to put down on it? And the more down payment you put down, the less mortgage that you have. And so the less mortgage that you have, the lower your payment's going to be, the less interest you're going to have associated with that. There is an ROI on that mechanic there, okay? It's equal to the interest rate on the mortgage, okay? So if you put an extra $1,000 down on your mortgage, that's an extra $1,000 that you're not going to pay interest on over the term of that loan. In that case, that mortgage rate is called a hurdle rate, okay? It's the hurdle that you have to get over in order to make what this next upcoming decision is going to be. So what you're going to look at is the ROI on the down payment money, right? The hurdle rate, which is roughly equal to the interest rate that's on the loan, and compare that to what your alternative is for doing with that money. All right. So that introduces the idea of opportunity cost. And I know we're throwing a lot of terms at you, and over time we will, if you don't know what they mean, you can either go look them up, or we will talk about them as they naturally show up in conversation. But to sit here and kind of spew the dictionary at you, that's not going to get us anywhere.
A couple of those are new to me.
Well, which is interesting. Right, but the concept it's totally common sense, right? So here I have some money. I'm buying a house. If I put it down on the house, if I take out a smaller mortgage, let's say my interest rate on a mortgage is going to be 6%. For every dollar I put in there, that's a dollar less that I'm going to pay 6% on. So I'm getting a 6% return on that. I could prove that out with some math, but just bear with me. Most people will understand and agree with that. Okay. Or I could do something else with that money. Presumably, I could put it down on a house, or I could do something else. So I could invest it elsewhere. What kind of a return am I going to get if I put it elsewhere? If I can get more than 6% doing something else with it, am I not better off getting 7 or 8 or 10 or 20% on that money, right? Getting a higher return than I would be investing it at this lower rate over here that I'm going to get. So I'm picking between those two things. That's where that idea of highest and best use comes from. All right. So let's talk about another lazy asset, the savings account, right? Doesn't mean it's worthless. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have one. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't have some money in it, but money that's sitting in there is underutilized. What kind of interest are you getting paid on a savings account these days? Probably not much. Not much.
Nope.
You know, it used to be, you know, in the recent past, we used to call it, 0 point nothing as a little joke. And I only mean that as half jokingly, because for some people, it's a huge deal. Our retirees, people that have retired prior to this, this new world of ultra low interest rates that just make absolutely no sense, because it completely devalues our capital in general in the market, and it causes extreme market disruptions. So if you wonder where inflation comes from, if you wonder where these business cycles come from, that's what you need to look at. That's what you need to study about. There's a whole body of knowledge on it beyond the scope of what we can talk about here. But those ultra low interest rates, they help borrowers, but they hurt savers. Okay. So if you have money sitting in a savings account, let's just be generous and say you're getting 2%. All right. Because that's an easy number to remember. It's earning 2% here, but if I put it down on my mortgage, I can get 6. Well, what should I do? Well, if we're just looking at finances and we're just making a financial decision here, we should take it out of the 2 and we should get 6. We're getting more bang for our buck there. We have increased the utilization of that asset or that capital. We have put it to a higher and better use. Okay. Now, the astute out there will also know that that's not the only concern, that there is a security factor that goes along with that. And emotional, remember, went back where we were talking about being risk averse, right? So money in a savings account is aversion to risk. To stem that, gosh, if I need some money, I've got some, and I don't have to go into debt to do it, right? I don't have to put it on a credit card. So, and that's what some people believe. That's totally okay. That's not going to get you in trouble, right? That's the Dave Ramsey stuff. So I won't disagree with that, but it does come with a cost, right? And we are kind of exploring some of that here. It's that same idea, all right? So, but let's get out of this. And oftentimes when people are talking about making a down payment, oftentimes the money is not sitting around in a savings account, right? Equity in existing property. Remember, so home equity, 0 ROI. This is a horizontal sideways move it from one property to another property. We haven't lost utilization, we haven't lost money, but we haven't really gained any money there. Okay. Savings account, we're going to pick up, that's the same case as the home equity, except it's not currently invested in home equity, or the property, it's in a savings account. So if we move that, we'll get a better, we can get a better deal. But what about things like money if we're going into a 401k? What if you're not maxing out your 401k? What if you're not maxing out your 401k to the point where you can't take advantage of your employer match if your employer has one, right? Well, that's going to have an ROI on it, presumably expected ROI greater than 6% in this case, much higher than what the likely hurdle rate is going to be for that. Now let's go back to another thing we've talked about, which is paying off consumer debt. And I snuck into one of those conversations somewhere. The ROI on paying off consumer debt is astronomically high, meaning it looks really good on paper. You save a lot of money, right? And so money saved is money earned, penny saved, penny earned. When you do something that eliminates interest that you're going to pay in the future, that's a financial benefit. So that, if you're paying off, and we'll just keep this simple, but if you're paying off an 18 or 20 or 24% credit card versus putting money against a 6% mortgage, where are you going to get a better return? Well, you're better off paying off the credit cards. And so that's a really nice case, because when you pay the credit cards off, payments disappear. And so the payments that disappear over here, you're taking out a larger mortgage than you would have taken out. So you have a larger payment than you would have had if you hadn't done something else with the money. But the corresponding increase in that payment is less than the corresponding decrease in payments that you got from paying off debt. And really, that's the way all these things work out, is the alternative investment that you're looking at. So, if the hurdle rate on something is higher, the earnings on that higher ROI investment exceeds what you're saving by putting it against the mortgage. So one pays for the other, even though the mortgage is costing you more. And that is really the essence of what we're talking about when I say look at the bigger picture of the financial picture when making financial decisions. So, for example, in the case of what we're talking about here, buying or financing a home, you're looking at your entire financial picture and the way all these different things work together, rather than just looking at the transaction by itself, right? Because if we were just looking at the transaction by itself, it says make the largest down payment possible, get the absolute lowest rate possible, get the shortest term possible, because these things all equal less interest. And our goal, of course, is always to pay less interest. We don't want to cost ourselves less interest. And in that having that myopic view of the finances inside that box, all of those things are true, except that box doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a larger picture. So remember, we talked about the nesting idea of one thing is inside of another thing is inside of another thing, and each thing gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you get to, presumably at some point, you get to like the master plan, or, when I refer to the master or the financial universe, right? The universe of all these things, the way that they operate together. That's what I'm talking about. So taking that larger view will sometimes, in fact, most of the time, give you additional information with which to make a different decision, a better financial decision, than if you were just focusing on this one single solitary thing that doesn't exist by itself. So that's a common sense way to look at what might initially seem like a very complicated subject. When you break it down, it really makes perfect financial sense.
Okay.
So
should we take a break here?
Yeah, let's go to break. And when we come back, we'll wrap this up.
All right. You're listening to HomeWise. That's Michael Miget. I'm Stal Ponticus. Glad you're along for this edition of the show. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back. Welcome back to HomeWise. I'm Stal Ponticus with the host of the show, Michael Miget, and we're in the middle of this discussion here. So, Michael, take it away, buddy.
Thanks, Stal. So, if you are just joining us, man, you missed a fun one. It kind of got thick there, but one thing that I'm a firm believer in, I know that on the surface, when you initially start thinking about or hearing about these financial concepts, they can be or seem intimidating, seem complicated or whatever, especially if it's the first time that you've been introduced to them. There's no doubt about it. So if you're listening and you're trying to follow along and you're lost, you're right where you should be. Okay. Because one, I know you're trying, right? By fact that you're still listening. This is not something that you're just going to hear once, pick up, oh, got it, and move on and got it. I am equating it back to real life and breaking it down into make sense bits and pieces and putting it together so that if you work with it enough, you can get enough of an understanding with which to know a direction, right? And a lot of this is just kind of knowing what questions do I need to ask moving forward. Is what the person I'm talking to saying makes sense with what my goals are? And so if somebody says how much you should put down on a house and somebody just says, oh, well, most people do 20% because you have no PMI. Like, well, yeah, those are all true. And none of that'll get anybody thrown in jail. But is that really doing you a service? Or is it doing you a disservice? And the question is, does that person, are they just being lazy? Do they not know? We talk about fiduciary duty on this show from time to time. Just means you act in other people's interests before you act in your own. You do what's right for them, not what's right for you. And some of that comes down to intent. Okay. So, and this is also something I know I've heard from more than a couple of people that sometimes it sounds like I'm bagging on other people. And I am, but I'm not, right? I'm not like in a hateful, meaningful way, but I'll tell you what, if that's the way you take it, if that's what it takes to get the point across, then fine. Because the only person I really care about in this whole deal is you, right? You're listening to this. It doesn't matter what I want. It doesn't matter what another guy wants. It doesn't matter what the seller, it doesn't matter. None of that matters. It only matters what you want. It only matters what's good for you. Because you're going to be in this house for a while, or you better be planning to be in this house for a while. This is not something to take lightly. So you should, and it's really easy especially for those of us in the industry, to gloss over things, that this we don't give the decision the time and effort. And sometimes you just ask questions, oh, boom, 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 these are the answers, and we move on. And it just seems so wow, did he even think about that? And I mean, I've been guilty of it in the past, not because I didn't give it its due diligence on thought, but I mean, you're asking me a question I have heard before, and I've already sized up your situation. I already have in mind. I mean, I kind of already know the questions you're going to ask. So a lot of times I'll tell people, hey, ask me anything you want, but anything that you don't ask me, I will answer the questions that I think you should be asking that you may not have known to ask. In other words,
which is good. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's me looking out for you. Right. And I'll do my best to do it in a way that doesn't lose you in the minutia of some of this. So don't this is not, if you call me up and we talk about, doing financing or whatever, this is not the kind of thing that we talk about. I talk about this on the show so that you can get an idea of who I am, to know that there's more to the answers and the prescriptions and the things that I do than just an industry rule of thumb that I could get from anybody. I just happen to be asking this guy. But if I asked any other guy, I'd get the same answer, because a mortgage is a mortgage, and what difference does it make? And I'm just looking for the cheapest one. And by the way, I believe in getting you the cheapest one. All right. We may not have the same definition of what that is, but I also know from experience, but I also know that if the tables were turned and it were me, and I was hearing an answer that seemed to go against what I thought that I knew, right, I would want that explained to me. I wouldn't want it to be a revelation to the guy or girl that what he just said to me does not make sense with what most people believe, right? I don't want to ask, I don't get what you just said. I thought it was this other way. Oh, well, and then you get it well, what are the other things that I missed that I should be asking that I didn't. So I have a specific approach, and I've actually gone through that approach. I mean, I actually took you through a live call, the way, not a live call like somebody called in and we were having that conversation, but I walked you through what a live call would go through, using you as the guinea pig, so to speak. You can find that, HomeWiseRadio.com. It's on there. Okay. All the past shows, including that one. So you can go find out, you can get this one, you can get all of them. But something I want to go to before we wrap this up is, because I know that it's something I touched on initially, right? And this goes back to that, but hey, Mike, don't leave me hanging for something that I know you're thinking about, which is that emotional decision versus the financial decision. And there's a strong aversion to a mortgage versus carrying a larger mortgage just because it has a financial benefit to it. There's more than just financial benefit baked into this thing, right? There's the emotional piece. People hate mortgages. They just, even if it's a great mortgage, I know I should have it, whatever, but I mean, I can give you a whole list of clients out there and more people that I know that are prepaying 2% and 3% mortgages to get them paid off faster. I know people prepaying 2% 15-year mortgages to get them paid off faster. I mean, it's the darn cheapest. There's almost no interest on the thing at all. I think it worked out to, I figured it out, it was going to be less than $1,000 of interest a year. It's almost not even worth working on. But no, we want to pay this off. It's a goal of ours. Great. I like that. Okay. There are probably better financially viable things you could do with that money, but it's not a terrible decision. All right. So if you come to me, we're not going to argue about this, right? If you have a stated goal to get something paid off, let's pay it off. All right. I will throw guardrails up and I will do the best I can to keep you from making stupid decisions that will hurt you. But I don't define hurt in the same way that, well, you could have got 2x benefit, but you only got 1.5x benefit, right? You still got a benefit, a significant benefit. It just wasn't like the maximized benefit. Well, why wouldn't you do that, Mike? Here's why, all right? Because it's not always a clear winner between decisions. So let's say you have that 2 or 3% mortgage and you're prepaying it. You can probably get better than 2 or 3% on that money, right? I mean, I would be willing to bet money on it. I'm not even a gambling person. Okay, but you can probably do better than 2 or 3% if you're willing to accept a little bit of risk. Oh, well, there's that word again, risk. Risk, right? People are risk averse. Okay. I also want to draw attention to a very specific word that I put into the definition of when I was describing hurdle rate, which is when we're looking at the expected ROI on the alternative investment to compare it to the interest rate on the mortgage that we're looking at putting more money down to lower that mortgage amount. We get return equal to the hurdle rate, the interest rate on that mortgage. Notice I said expected ROI on the alternative investment. Well, what happens if the ROI that we expect to get isn't the return that we actually get, right? So I gave the example of investing in your employer's 401k to take advantage of the match, okay? I would expect that you're going to do better than, in the example we use, 6%, right? I would expect you to do better than 6%, but it's not a guarantee. You might not do better than 6% because there is some risk in the stock market. Okay. Now, over time, it's a manageable risk. That risk is mitigated in some degree when we're comparing gross dollars because this is involving the employer match. But you could still wind up with nothing. Right. So, point being, we're focusing on that expected ROI. All right. You don't always get expected ROI. So, what I like to say is working mortgage acceleration, or the artificial paying down of a mortgage loan, can be part of a, diversification of investments. So, the idea that you have some money in the market and you have some money in real estate and you have some money doing other things. Maybe you have invested in a business or whatever. One of those things you could consistently invest some money in over time would be to pay down your mortgage, if that's a goal. And also depending on what else you're doing, right? So there are a lot of factors in there. So to just say that, well, everybody should just try to pay down their mortgage. Well, I can't say that. Or what order should we pay down our mortgage, or what else should we be doing? Because everybody's situation is different. But the banking model, when you look at it this way, puts some form and fashion to what those decisions can be. So there is a way that can play into the mix, totally not violate the model, and if basically it's licensed to make a decision that you want to make. All right. So I'm available to help out with all these things, what I do on a daily basis, whether it's debt consolidation / elimination plans, whether it's figuring out how much money should I be putting down, getting better rates. And by the way, rates do factor into this equation. If you haven't picked up on that yet, they do. We're going to be talking about that also. There's a couple other features of this that, when all put together, defines what that banking model is. But these are things I do every day. So you can reach me. You can find me phone and email, or on HomeWiseRadio.com. My mortgage website is GoShelter.com. If you want to call me or text me direct, it's 314-275-0314.
That's great. Thank you so much for all that information. That wraps up this edition of HomeWise. That's Michael Miget. I'm Stal Ponticus. Glad that you were able to join us, and we hope you'll join us again next weekend for our next edition of HomeWise. Take care.
Loans and loan information provided by Shelter Mortgage, Inc. Visit us at GoShelter.com and MLS number 192609. a Missouri residential mortgage licensee and equal housing lender. Call 888-497-2558 for additional cost information. Other restrictions may apply.